Paul Smith. Grew up in southern Nevada, live in Cedar City right now. Spent 20 years in the Army. Most of it doing normal Army stuff, whatever that amounts to. I just have my, there it is. After I got out of the Army, I got a PhD in philosophy from the University of Texas at Austin. My wife said I was majoring in unemployment, and she's proven to be correct. Not quite. Have bachelor's and master's degrees in Middle Eastern Studies, which acknowledged has nothing to do with philosophy, but I have a lot of interests. Okay? I happen to be a psychic spy. Now, everybody else forgot everything I said until I just now said that, right? I was, for 7 years, the entire time I was a captain in the U.S. Army, I was a member of what became known as the Stargate program. That was actually only the name for a little bit of the time, but it's come to be known as that. And what happened was, and I'll tell you this story as it unfolds, they recruited military personnel and government civilians and trained them in a form of controlled clairvoyance, if you will, disciplined clairvoyance, called remote viewing, and then we used our minds to spy on the Soviets, or the Hezbollah, or narco-traffickers, or Chinese nuclear tests, or whoever the bad guys were at any given time during the Cold War. Any significant intelligence problem that the U.S. government had that they could not get ground truth on, because some of the other methods that didn't work, they came to us. We were the court of last resort. So let me tell you about this. All right, so if we could get the lights down a little bit. Meet the Real X-Files. The reason I call it that is because it is very similar to many of the stories in the X-Files, except this was really written, this was really happening. This wasn't just something written by a writer, as many of you are. So you mostly know the story of the X-Files. You have these two folks, one a semi-skeptic, one a true believer, going around trying to get to the bottom of these really bizarre, weird stories that nobody else in the FBI knew how to handle. And they looked at things like spaceships and I don't know what the heck was going on there, and weird little creatures and all that kind of stuff. And I'll come back to that in a second. And they spent the time going around, and there's all kinds of weird things happened, and they tried always to paint it so you didn't know what was real and what wasn't. I'm going to tell you one of these X-Files that really was real. Okay, and the U.S., well, in fact, the world heard about it the very first time in November of 1995 on Nightline, when Ted Koppel was still around doing these kinds of things. He had a bunch of people on there. One was actually a former director of the CIA, and actually now a former Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates. He had some managers of this program that was known as Stargate by this time. He had a psychic spy on there, and he had some of the people that were customers of the psychic spies giving testimony that it really did work. Okay, you can find that actually on YouTube now, that particular episode. And so there was this huge media storm. You saw lots of newspaper articles coming out about this, and eventually, of course, it died down. But there became this cottage industry around the world, people wanting to learn what these government psychic spies were doing. Well, here's what they were doing. We call it remote viewing. And this is just kind of a general definition. This is not the military definition because that's just bureaucratic jargon. This gives you a general idea. Remote viewing is the perception or the perceiving of real impressions, concepts, and sensory data from a distant or hidden target using only the powers of the mind, in other words, extrasensory perception alone. Okay? So remote viewing is a learned skill. The one thing they ascertained is that anybody can learn this that has all of their brain intact. Anybody can learn this, at least to a certain level. It's based on an innate ability that everybody has. Everybody has the underlying faculty. The skill builds on that faculty. It's kind of like reading. Everybody has the ability to read. Well, they have the faculty that allows one to learn how to read, but you have to learn how to do it before you can actually do it. Right? But you do have to follow correct principles, and it requires a lot of practice. This is a complex human skill, and like any complex human skill, it takes practice to be good at it. You can do it okay to start with, but if you really want to get good, you've got to keep practicing. All right, what it is not. It is not channeling. Who can tell us what channeling is? Please.
When you're supposedly, you got somebody else coming through you and you're speaking for someone else.
That's right. Some other entity is somehow speaking through you. Usually they're dead or they're in another dimension, you know, whatever. Okay. It is not channeling, even though some people think it's the same thing. I don't make any commitment on whether channeling works or not. That's up to you to decide. It is not astral projection or out-of-body experience, although there's some similarities. It may be on the same spectrum. In out-of-body experience, you have this impression that you are really, all of you is going somewhere, although you know your physical body is back at home, whatever. In remote viewing, you are aware of being sitting at a table, working, but it's as if you also have your consciousness extended somewhere else. So there's a difference in experience there. And it is not video in the head. What do you think I mean by video in the head? Anybody got to guess what I mean by that phrase?
You're not seeing it like a movie going through.
That's right. It's not the way Hollywood portrays being psychic. Okay? Movies and TVs, oftentimes they'll show it as if the psychic is getting these really vivid experiences, vivid images. They can see the face of the murderer. They get the license plate of the car. You know, and they solve the crime. Right? It does not work that way, and I'll explain how it does as we go along. Okay. So remote viewing. Well, remote viewing results can be written, they can be verbal, they can be sketched. In fact, we encourage sketching. They even may involve clay model models. Well, those are models, aren't they? You clay model representation of whatever it is that you're supposed to be remote viewing. And it also requires a certain protocol or set of rules that you have to follow for it to be considered real remote viewing. Okay? So here are the rules. First one is a remote viewer cannot know what the intended target is. When I say target, I'm talking about the thing that the remote viewer is going to remote view. It can be a place, it can be a person, it can be an event, it can be anything that you could physically go and perceive if you knew where it was, what it was, and had the means to get there. Okay? It can be anything on the face of the earth, and actually, there's even been remote viewers who have targeted other planets, including the moon. Some of those are controversial. Some of them were legitimate remote viewings of things we knew about. Okay. So anyway, but the remote viewer has to be blind to whatever that assigned target is. And can anybody think of why?
So they don't go.
Go ahead.
To keep it neutral in order to establish some sort of authenticity.
Okay, good. So for one thing, if they knew what the target was, and then they start talking about the target, then a skeptic would say, well, they already know what it was, you know? So you can't accuse a remote viewer of cheating because they don't know what it is in the first place. There's a hand back there.
That was the same thing.
Okay, good. And you said something.
I just did preconception.
Preconceptions, yes.
Yeah, so I was going to say, it removes any bias if you know that you're spying on an embassy in Dubai and you have whatever.
You just miraculously find a bunch of Indians hanging around, right? That's a big problem. Part of it is cheating. We don't want the skeptics to think we're cheating, but much more importantly is knowing what the target is actually makes it harder to remote view and get information that you don't already have in your head. Right? It generates what we call mental noise. So I saw one more, but I think I got all the hands, right?
I got a question.
Sure.
Does it mean you can't, if you're just not doing it for the military, you're just doing it for yourself, and you want to check out something, does it keep you from being able to?
That is a problem, and that takes a little bit of answering. So why don't we hold that to the end, and I'll answer that much more fully, rather than just say yes. Okay. But that is a good, very legitimate question. All right. The second rule is when you're doing an operational or a scientific project, operational meaning a real world, trying to solve a crime, whatever it might be, no one else associated with the remote viewer should know anything about the target either. Why would that be the case?
In case you pick something up from them.
Nonverbal communication, accidental cueing, inadvertent slip of the tongue. You don't want this person to inadvertently give the viewer additional information they didn't get psychically. You want it all to be in a very clean, mental, ESP-derived channel. Right?
You want to contaminate it.
That's right. You don't want to contaminate it. Okay. We call this double-blind, and it's a standard in scientific practice. There are many, many kinds of double-blind trials that happen in science. finally, well, I don't know if this is final, the target must be verifiable, okay? That means there has to be something there that's real, that you can show the viewer after they're done, which I think might be the last one. Feedback is important, okay? It has to be verifiable. Now, there are a lot of people who want to do UFO events or Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster, and okay, that's fine, that's playing around. The originator of remote viewing, who I'll talk about in a minute, Ingo Swann, didn't consider that to be real remote viewing if you didn't have verifiability to verify that you were really remote viewing something, okay? Because if you aren't able to get that ground truth, at least ultimately, you never know whether what you got was fantasy or real, right? And feedback's important because that's how remote viewers get better, is they see what the feedback was, they know what they got, and they start, they're able to compare those two things and realize, oh, I should have done something a little differently here so that I would have been more accurate in the end. That's the learning process. Every human learning experience requires some kind of feedback in order for that person to continue to learn and to improve their performance. All right, so here are some example remote viewing results. This was a sketch done, remember, double blind, right? The viewer fully blind, not knowing what the target was. In fact, all that was happened was the viewer was given, actually in this case, geographic coordinates. But, you know, geographic coordinates can be anywhere in the world, in particular if you don't know how to read them. Okay, so that was the target, and that was the target, and that was the result. So you can see here, the viewer didn't know what this was. The viewer did this sketch, and then later was shown this. Okay, so that's pretty good. Even that you would think that that was a pretty good sketch of the target if they were looking at it. And in this case, they weren't looking at it. They didn't even have any idea that was the target. It could have been anywhere in the world. Here's another one. This should look familiar. This target was Kennecott Copper Mine, right? You've got, this was the feedback that the viewer was shown afterward. This is the clay model response that the viewer created and said, it reminds me of an open pit mine. It's weird, it's big, it's huge, and I'm gonna make this model out of this clay, and it looks something like this. And you can see that's not a bad representation considering the circumstances under which it was done. Not all the results you get are as literal as you might like. This is one that wasn't quite as impressive as the two we've seen so far. The remote viewer said, well, there is water here. This is land. This is what they said there. This is land, and there's this platform, and it's got stanchions on it. But what he said was it's floating on the water. He thought it was floating on the water. It didn't occur to him it was a bridge. And then he said, well, and there's this thing here. I just feel like I have to sketch that. For some reason, I think that's there. I don't know why, but I think it's there. And of course, when we see what the actual target was, we understand why he did that. But sometimes and often the channel is kind of vague. And you can imagine that, because this is, as you can imagine, a fairly low bandwidth kind of an experience where you get a bit of information in, bits and pieces of information in over time, as I'll talk about further. Yes, sir?
I'm curious about the phrasing at the onset of this. Okay, remote viewer person.
Yeah.
Here's what we want. I don't know how does
What
that
happened in
start?
this case, after a while, and this is a long story, so I'll just tell you, and if you want to know more about it afterwards, I'll tell you, but we used what was called encrypted coordinates. It was the case that after a while, geographic coordinates kind of got in the way, because if you do enough of these, you sort of get an idea of where in the world they are, right? Now that didn't necessarily help you be good at remote viewing, because if the target were, say, a snug laboratory in downtown Moscow, but you got lat longs for that, but the geographic coordinates, and the viewer knows it's somewhere in the Soviet Union, but doesn't know where, just knows it's generally from the coordinates. Then you get all this imagery of snow and steppies and wolves howling and all that kind of stuff, right? And so oftentimes knowing what the coordinates were actually made it worse, and you got distracted by the coordinates. So we started using what's called encrypted coordinates, and they're just really essentially an arbitrary number that stands for the target. And all the viewer gets is the arbitrary number. They have no connection, they have no conscious connection to what that is, or what the actual target or the assignment is. And so they get that number, and that's what starts them out. They just follow the process and then they get the information. And like I said, there's a lot more to that story, and I probably garbled things up. Yes?
So does that mean they just kind of made up a number, like they made a map and then they put a pretend
No.
number on it and gave them that?
No, like I say, there's more to the story. It
Okay.
actually has nothing to do with the original coordinates. It has to do with the intentionality in the process. The tasker decides, I use this number all the time, 8675309. The people that laugh, I know, get the joke. Right, 8675309 equals, say, I don't know, describe the Eiffel Tower, right? Well, the viewer gets the 8675309, does not get the part describe the Eiffel Tower. But what has happened is the tasker has intentionally connected those two things. And so I like to say a remote viewer is kind of psychic in two different ways. The first way is the obvious way that we're talking about. They go and describe the target somehow or other. The other way is they have to be kind of telepathic. They sort of have to read the tasker's mind to find out what that number is linked to. This all happens at the subconscious level. The viewer consciously doesn't know anything about all of this until he or she, because we have a lot of females doing this too, until he or she starts to actually produce these these results that, like such as you've seen. You know, we probably can't do too many questions yet. Maybe save it to the end if that's okay. Okay. All right. So some details are very literal. You'll see in a minute. This is absolutely accurate. But looking at it like this, it makes no sense. You don't know what that is, right?
Pigs.
That's the target. Now, in this case, the photo was the target. This wasn't a real-world target. It's a thing called associative remote viewing, which I talked about on Thursday, where you can predict the future. I won't go into the details because it takes too long to explain. But you can see that this is literally accurate as concerned what's here. This thing right here, this is a remote viewing trial I did. I sketched this thing. I didn't know exactly what it was, and I said, well, it looks like a shaving brush, right? And then when I saw the photo, I knew exactly what my subconscious was trying to get me to convey. I didn't know it when I looked at it, but once I saw the photo, it became obvious. Right? All right, some remote viewing results are both visual and verbal. These were sketches from a remote viewing project. And then this was the summary that came out of it. And the facts that were developed during the course of this remote viewing session, as we call them, that the target was dome, multi-level, repetitive, square, rectangular shapes were involved. It had a cream color exterior, inside colors were gold, yellow, red, blue, gray, green. It was a wooden and stone construction. Light was shining through the colored glass. The structure was ornate, it contained art, and it was historical. There were two prominent wooden rectangular doors that sometimes remote viewers will pick up features that you don't know why they pick them up, but they do, right? People involved were wearing flowing clothing with head drapings, and she had the feeling that it was of seriousness, respectfulness, and deeply felt feelings. It was a holy place to her, all right? Guess what the target was? Quick guess. A mosque or something like that, right? It actually was Ettal Monastery in southern Germany. Okay? And you can see that how the sketches came out. I probably should have made those a little bigger. You can see it's quite silly. You've got these kind of, although these are rounded, and she got them to kind of square, but there's the big doors, and she exaggerated it because they caught her attention. If you note, the doors aren't as big in relation to the cloister as she's got them depicted, but they're still darn big doors when you get up close to them. Here's an overview. In fact, that's the front doors right there. You can see all the gold and blue and all the colors she described in there, and of course, stained glass windows are present in this thing.
So you can see color.
Yes, tons of, yes, you can actually, yes. So here's another one. A lot of remote viewing results can be what we call kinesthetic, right? Where you actually create a model of it. Your muscle movement gets involved in translating the signal into something concrete. And you can see this target, quite a good representation of Grand Coulee Dam. Now it was interesting, I was there at the time this viewer was doing it. He was in the viewing room, closed off for the rest of us, and all of a sudden the door opens, he comes running out. He says, I need to find a blue magic marker. I need a blue magic marker. And we're going, what? Because we had no idea what he was doing. Well, it turned out he knew this was water, and he didn't want to do it in black in case anybody would misunderstand what he was perceiving. So he went looking for a blue magic marker so he could actually get it in there the way he felt like it ought to be. All right, now I'm not going to go into this list. This is just to show that there's lots of different kinds of remote viewing, all with the same goal, but each is a kind of a different approach to it. The one kind I teach